Morning, everyone. My name's Richard, if you don't know me. I've known that guy my whole life. That's Michael, that's my son. And today I'd like to introduce him in regards to post-traumatic stress syndrome. So, if you think back to one of the worst things, one of the most traumatic things you've ever seen, they said in an average lifespan, a person will have anywhere between 2 and 5 things that they've seen in their lifetime that stick out in their head. It could be a really bad accident. For me, my first memory in my life is when I set my basement on fire when I was 5 years old. I was playing on an outboard motor that my dad had stored in the basement, and I was pressing the gas bulb of the 5-gallon gas tank, and that hit the hot water pilot light, and we set the basement on fire. My dad and my Uncle Bill Bernicle put it out, but that sticks with you for the rest of your life. So it might be a bad accident. It might be something that's really, really traumatic that you've seen in your life or gone through in your life that you remember. Now, like I said, the average person, 2 to 5 incidents in their life. A police officer, anywhere between 100 and 400. I was a cop for 30 years. Had a heart attack at the age of 40. Got out at the age of 50. And Dummy here decides to follow me into the police service. And he has been at it now for 11 years. And couldn't be more proud of him. So, before you start crying, Michael.
So yeah, my name is Michael Brouwer. I'm 32 years old. It's my father. Can't choose family. So just want to apologize in advance. I've never done this before. I've never talked in front of strangers. I've shared my story with friends and family. I suffered alone for a good period of time, and that's why I'm here today to try to help people just be aware and how important it is to share with people. So I've been married for 9 years. I have a beautiful wife and 2 children. One's 7, one is 4. My background, I've gone to Heritage Reformed congregation my whole life. I went to Jordan Christian School as well. 2 years of college. I got a Police Foundations diploma. I was smart enough for university. I worked for Parks Police while I was in college as a provincial offense officer. I guarded a lot of tulips down on the parkway. At the same time, I did an auxiliary program with Niagara Regional Police, and in August of 2011, I was hired as a special constable. So that's kind of my background. In 2014, I started working in downtown St. Catharines on the road. So the first, I don't know if they give you handouts. I might be all over the place. I tried to rehearse, but it changed every time, so I'm trying to piece it together here for you. So the crisis, a lot of people ask, well, what was the crisis that led you to being diagnosed with anxiety, depression, and PTSD? So believe it or not, I didn't just get diagnosed with 3, I got diagnosed with 4. After the birth of my first child, I was diagnosed with postpartum depression, which I didn't even know existed in men. Believe it or not, 10% of men have some form of postpartum depression. And in my life, it was to the point where I wanted to harm my child and I wanted to harm myself. And it was an extremely terrifying thing in life because I couldn't explain why. I didn't know why. Looking back now, I can see some warning signs and anxiety and some depression signs that I didn't notice back then. Even prior to my child being born, my firstborn, I would come home from work after a night shift and sometimes I'd be physically ill. I'd vomit. I'd have stomach aches. I'd have the runs. And I didn't know why. I just thought I was tired or exhausted or had a stressful night. But looking back now, I see that those are the early signs of going through anxiety and depression. So after my first child was born, it took about 3 weeks before I realized something was really wrong. We were going to church in the morning. Our child was to be baptized in the afternoon service, and just driving to church in the morning. And all of a sudden, I peeled off the highway. My wife was freaking out, like, what's going on? And I said, I can't do this. I went home, and with the exception of being temporarily medicated for the afternoon service to baptize my child, I never left my bedroom for 6 months unless I was going to work as a police officer, and that's the only place I felt safe. I developed the extreme social and anxiety to hang out with my friends, hang out with my family, and I didn't know why. So shortly after all of a sudden this hit me, I was thankful I got into my family doctor, Dr. Venter, for those who sat in on his topic, and he told me I had anxiety and depression, and most likely some type of postpartum depression. And he told me, yeah, I got antidepressants, they're gonna help you. It's gonna take up to 6 weeks for them to help you. And at work, we only see crazy people that need medication, and I didn't see myself as that way. So at first I was very hesitant to go on these medication. I took the prescription, I went home, and I didn't take them for several weeks until I realized I probably wouldn't be around anymore until I started taking them. And it was about a 6-week process till the medication started working in me, and that darkness and that feeling of someone sitting on your chest while you're underwater started lifting and went away. That feeling of me wanting to harm myself started lifting and started going away. I could confront the day. I could get up in the mornings. I could go outside my house, outside of work. And it started lifting. And I was confused. I was angry. I was angry at God. I was angry at every part of what I was going through, because I didn't know why. I didn't see why God chose me to go through it. I had everything in life that I could ever ask for: a family, a great job, beautiful home, and I just didn't know why. So after 6 months of getting better and healing through this, it was shortly after work was all of a sudden realizing that we have a lot of people suffering with mental health issues in our community, and a program came up called the MCR program, which is the Mobile Crisis Response. That program is a police officer that works, and he is partnered up with a nurse or someone that has a degree in sociology, psychology, or some type of mental health related course. I started seeing kind of God's reason for putting me through what he did, because now I had an opportunity to help people. I got over that social anxiety. I didn't have my depression, that dark feeling anymore, and it was, in a sense, pretty short-lived. It felt like a long 6 months going through it, but now looking back, it was very short in the grand scheme of things. And I actually was thankful that I did go through that, because now I had a chance to help people at work. I began doing the mental health response team for a period of about 4 years, and we show up to either completed suicides, attempted suicides, intentional overdoses, any calls dealing with schizophrenia, and any high trauma calls where people are either traumatized. Through work, we receive training to deal with people that are either going through trauma, who are dealing with mental health issues, and it was fantastic. I loved every bit of it. There was obviously dark days, suicides from 12-year-olds all the way up to 80. It was a great job in the sense that we were able to help a lot of people, but we also saw a lot of dark things. And I believe that God put me in that position, not only because I could relate in this little sense of what some of these people were going through. People that are self-harming or inflicting physical pain opposed to take away the emotional pain. And we were able to kind of talk through it and get them help instead of just dragging them to the hospital, providing them community resources. And it was fantastic. That brings me to about June of 2019. And this is kind of where I was flocked with a lot of really traumatic events in my life. These are all specifically related to calls at work. Not only did, right after having my second child, we had 2 dead infants that we dealt with at work, which struck home, and yeah, those are calls that I'm never going to forget. Those are calls that are ingrained into me that affected me, but I continued to hide it. I hid it through working my full-time job. Also, my hobby of cutting trees became another full-time job. I hid it through alcohol. I hid it through so many different avenues, and I pretended it didn't affect me, but it was eating away at me. One call I specifically remember, I had a client that I was working with at work who we would see weekly for mental health related calls. I was dealing with him one morning at work. He was intoxicated right on Glendale Avenue in St. Catharines. He refused a ride home from me, and 30 minutes later we found him. He threw himself under a transport on the highway, on the 406. I took that personally because he was one of my clients and I was supposed to help him and I didn't, or I couldn't. That went by and I, once again, hid it. I tucked it under. I didn't talk about it. I kept busy enough so I tried not to think about it. At the same time, we were receiving a plethora of suicides off the Burgoyne Bridge in St. Catharines, where on a weekly basis we could see 2 to 3 suicides, and we were the guys going to pick up the body pieces under the bridge every day and going to tell their families about it. And once again, it's just a part of the job, and I hid it, and I continued to hide it. About 3 weeks later, I was taking a break up in Thorold, which is a slower zone. I had a guy who went to sleep in his vehicle because he had to work the next day and he was waiting for his wife. His vehicle caught on fire just as we were driving down the road, and we tried to save him, but we couldn't, and he burned alive in front of us. Once again, it was just a part of the job. 2 weeks later, on the 406 overpass right at Glendale, I was driving at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I witnessed a really bad collision right after it happened. I saw a fireball. I pull up and I noticed 2 vehicles were completely demolished on the highway. I attended to the one vehicle. There was a middle-aged mom and a dad in the one vehicle. They were conscious, they were talking, and there was a young 19-year-old in the other vehicle. The vehicle started on fire, so we went to save him. I saved him, we took him out of the car. I went back to get the parents, and just as I was approaching their car, it burst into flames and they burned alive in front of me. It wasn't until later that night that we discovered that 19-year-old was on a suicide mission and was driving the wrong way on the highway. And I saved the wrong person. And that's what I told myself. I might sweat out of my eyeballs a bit, but not crying. That was really, really hard to live with. I still think about it. And yeah, I saved the guy who killed two people, and I was from media away watching him burn alive, and I couldn't save him, and that really hurt me. I hid that because that's just a part of the job. They actually gave me a week off after that because it's just a part of the job, but they gave me a week off to take a break. the first day back, I went to a double suicide where two people signed a pact and they gutted each other. And I was okay with that in a weird sense because it was just a part of the job, and I hid it. It wasn't until the next day I went hunting with my tree cutting partner, and it was awesome. We shot a beautiful deer that we could harvest for meat. And it wasn't until we loaded the deer up into the truck and gutted it, and it brought me back to that place. And it brought me back to every call that compiled and that I hid and I hid and I hid. And I had a really, really bad breakdown. I went home. I was vomiting. I was in my house with no clothes on. I wasn't even in the right mindset. My wife was terrified, and she called my dad. My dad came and picked me up, put me in the shower, and he called my work, and they took my gun away. And that was really hard, because as a police officer, that's your identity. That was the hardest thing that ever happened to me, because they were afraid I was going to kill myself. So, how did I get better? I was very thankful for, number one, our Christ, our Savior. He's the reason I'm still here today. Best counseling book I ever read was the Bible. Paul already read Psalm 77, which sucks because I was going to read it. And I'll read some parts of it. Believe it or not, I got better from this. And I am the go happy, get lucky, have fun type of guy that I always was before all of this happened. And I'm upset right now because it's opening that filing cabinet of traumatic events. But it's a good thing that I'm upset because that means I'm human. My very first counseling session was spending an hour and a half in Dr. Venter's office bawling my eyes out, telling him I was sick. He referred me to a psychologist, a secular psychologist that specializes in PTSD and trauma counseling, specifically with police, pilots, and military veterans. I was hesitant going there because it wasn't biblical counseling. I was worried that people would judge me based on going through CBT therapy, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, or EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a real fancy term for something very simple. But the largest support was my Christian family, my Christian church, my Christian friends, and our Savior. God used medication made by secular people to help me. And I was so afraid I was going to get judged and told, well, if it's not biblical, it's not right. And I understand that aspect of it, and I'm not saying the route I took is always the right route for everybody. But it helped. God worked with many people in my life to help me be where I am today. One of my best counselors I went to is my wife. She's there for me 24/7, 365 days a year. She's probably annoyed about how much support she's got to give me, but she loved me through the thick and thin. I also was accepted as the second police officer in Ontario to get accepted to this course called the PCIS in South Carolina, which specifically deals with PTSD. wasn't really proud to get accepted to it because you got to be pretty screwed up to get on it. Well, I got there. I was accepted. It's mandatory that my wife came, and the really cool story about how God uses some people that aren't necessarily Christians to help us. My sergeant, who I work with every day, is still on my shift. A bad guy disarmed him and shot him with his own gun. He got accepted to this course 10 years ago, but he didn't know this course was religious-based. So he always said, they tricked me, but I know you're a Bible thumper, so you're going to like it. I didn't even really know what it was. It was in the thick of the Bible Belt in South Carolina. And I got there, and there's a police officer's Bible on my spot with my name and the Canadian flag, because I was the only Canadian. That was pretty amazing. And then this whole course, which was mandatory for my wife to go on as well, because they provide spousal support for her to deal with idiots like me. And it was fantastic. The whole entire course was based on Psalm 77, and it was pretty incredible. That was kind of my counseling and recovery. I still see a shrink once in a while, just to check in, make sure I'm okay at work, make sure I can carry a gun, and make safe decisions. Moving down to coping techniques, one of the easiest coping techniques for me is my medication. I'm on serotonin, or Cipralex as some people know it. It's a mood hormone. If you're diabetic, you take insulin. If you are lacking serotonin, you take Cipralex. And it helps me stabilize. I don't feel any effect of the medication except that I'm a happy-go-lucky individual, and it's awesome. God has blessed the medication to me. Doing the EMDR was really helpful as well. Really quickly, kind of how that works. If you have a traumatic event in your life, all your senses are working 10 times better than they normally would. You remember sights, sounds, smells, feelings, the temperature at that exact traumatic event. For those who are old enough, I bet you every single person in this room knows exactly where they were when they heard about 9/11. And that's kind of how it works. With traumatic events and EMDR, basically it takes that sight, sounds, smells from a 70-inch 4K TV into a little 1 inch by 1 inch black and white TV. And that's kind of how I recollect events now that have been traumatic. And it's really amazing. CBT therapy helped me as well. The darkness lifted. Medication helped. And one of the biggest coping techniques I use is to lean on the Lord in hard times. It's the biggest support you can get, as we heard this morning, and I'm sure all the other topics. There's nothing better. I don't know how I could have done this. I wouldn't be here right now if it wasn't for my faith, and I'm so thankful for that. Where are we for time?
Yeah, you're good. You got it. Maybe 15.
Oh, okay. Hopefully I'll have some time if anybody has questions. My current circumstances, where am I now? Well, I'm at Heritage Reformed Congregation sharing my story. I'm able to talk about it. My eyes sweat a bit once in a while, but I'm able to talk about it, and I think that that's awesome. I cope through my medication, my self-awareness. I still do the mental health response at work once in a while. I don't do it full time, but I love helping people that have gone through something similar or dealing with anxiety or PTSD. It helps me help them, and I think God has blessed me that way. It helps for me to talk about the past. It helps me reflecting on what has happened to prepare for the future. Warning signs. I think that I'm always going to have to be careful for the rest of my life not to fall in that trap of that clinical depression. Anxiety. Sitting at the front of the church when my wife plays the piano, that gives me anxiety sometimes because I don't know you guys. And it's nothing personal, but it's tough for me. That's something that I can fight through. And just being aware of the warning signs when you're confronted with that building up to depression, or the anxiety that you fear going outside, going to large groups, family gatherings. Limiting alcohol, right? Alcohol counteracts an antidepressant because alcohol is a depressant. Quickly to Christ in closing. Leaning on a rock. I'm going to quickly read kind of my favorite verse through all of my struggles. Philippians 4, verse 6. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. My wife hung that verse on the wall in our kitchen in our old house, and every single day I looked at it, and I walked by it, and I got used to it. And then God made me actually use it, and that's kind of what's held me together. Understanding mental health, or why we go through things, or why I went through depression from a human perspective. It's great if we understand why, but we also have to be at peace sometimes with not knowing why. Sometimes we don't know why God has put us through things, and why he chose me to go through depression, or why he chose me to witness 5 bad calls in a matter of 6 weeks or 8 weeks. I don't know why, but I'm at peace with why he chose me. He's also put me in a place to help others, which is fantastic. I never thought in a million years I'd be talking about what I've gone through with others. And I think it's very important because I suffered alone. It was right after originally I was diagnosed with depression, and I was so embarrassed I didn't want to tell my family. I didn't want to tell my friends. I told my wife she wasn't allowed to tell anybody. She did. She called my sister and told her that she actually drove to her house and told her that I was diagnosed with depression. About 20 minutes later, my sister shows up at my house, and she has the exact same medication that I was given. And I was pissed at her because it took everything not to tell her, and I suffered alone. I asked her if I could share this story. I was pissed at her. It's so important not to suffer alone. It's so hard. It's so lonely. Mental health is lonely as it is. We can't suffer alone. And it's so important to share with others. It's important to talk about it, raise awareness. And I think that's a big part of this mental health conference. We probably could have had one of these 10 years ago. And it's until now that we're recognizing the massive issue, especially COVID and mental health these days, how important it is to have one of these conferences. So that's the last 6 years of my life in a nutshell. I could probably talk about it for a couple days, but I won't bore you with all the details. Any questions? Go ahead.
I just have a comment, and I wrote it down because, so I just want to, as a mom, I want to thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your story. And with that, thank you for walking beside those who struggle with mental health, addictions, and just living in your daily work.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Go ahead, Brian.
I was wondering if you have any suggestions for those going into policing or firefighting. Any of
Don't do it.
When it's too late, then what?
My father always said too, he said, you're never allowed to be a cop. I'll pay for your schooling if you want to be a doctor. If you want to become a cop, you're paying for your schooling. That's just because he's Dutch. I paid. So now with our police service, and a lot of police service, they're noticing we had 3 or 4 of our police officers in Niagara kill themselves over the last couple of years. So finally they're being proactive and preparing people. You have to meet with a psychologist when you get hired, 3 months after you get hired, 6 months after you get hired, and I would just really recommend anybody getting into first responders where they're going to see a lot of terrible things. Meet with the psychologist. Meet with a biblical counselor every couple months. It's only going to prepare yourself and help yourself stay close to God and be strong and help others. It's great to have Christian police officers and firefighters and EMTs, and it's awesome.
That's one thing we have more and more of these days is Christian police officers, Christian firefighters, and paramedics. Another piece of advice I would get is get that one friend that is not afraid to kick you in the pants. That one friend that you can call up. In my case, it's Kevin DeYoung. He was my best man 36 years ago. I call him up, I can dump on him, and he's good with it. So that's what you need. You need a sounding board. And you know, Michael's got that. So yeah, that's what you need. That's what he or she needs. Policing's a calling. I never understood it. I always wanted to become a police officer for different reasons, but it's a calling. I don't think it's any different than the calling of a minister. To go through what police officers go through, to see what police officers have had happen to them in the past 2 years in Portland and Seattle and Minneapolis with defunding the police, it's absolutely nuts. Just so you know, that guy that's sitting at the front of the room there, he's been decorated for bravery. Somebody tried to stab him, and his old man taught him how to headbutt, and he headbutted the guy, and he's still here. I got to hand him that award. And with his work of the homeless, he's also was named Police Officer of the Year last year. So, so we have heroes. I've got two, my son and my grandson. It's, you know what, it's a job that I'm glad I'm out of, but it's also, I'm proud that he's in it. Right, Mikey?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
And I think the key was keeping your eyes on the Lord.
Absolutely.
Because I don't know how non-Christians do it, honestly.
I wouldn't be here.
I would, yeah, and like just keeping your eyes on the Lord and having a biblical mindset on your job and what you're going through, and having that support from the church, and having that support from Christian people is very important.
Yeah.
In the Christian life, because we're not to Rambo Lone Ranger our faith. We're here as the family of God.
That's right.
Right, and so just to hear that from you is very encouraging, because no matter what we're going through, keep your eyes on the Lord. Right, your word is a lamp unto my feet, a light to my path. Right, and man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps.
That's right.
So if you have a right focus, then the Lord will guide you through any challenge you have. So thank you for just doing that.
Go ahead.
This is awesome. I guess my big question is, as we're becoming affiliated with more wonderful organizations like Safe Families and Foster, that you do have more people in your life who've gone through trauma that I've been sheltered from. How do we walk alongside those individuals who maybe you would have a better ability to relate to them, but we don't necessarily?
Yeah, so
Some recommendations and thoughts.
there's a lot of really good courses. Like me and my wife actually, total side note, we went through the whole adoption process, and there's a bunch of courses that we did in dealing with like children who have gone through trauma and dealing with those trauma. So through work, a bunch of trauma counseling courses and stuff like that. If you find that you're in a position where you're going to be dealing with children with trauma, I would highly recommend going to some courses. I don't know if Insight does any of those, or you can even do them online, just to kind of prepare you and of dealing with them, because these children, a really good example was when we were doing this adoption course. They were talking about if you had a foster child or had adopted a child, giving them a timeout might be very traumatic for them because they were neglected. Instead, you give them a time in. You put them on your lap, and they have to stay on your lap. I never saw that before. Even going through some traumatic stuff, I didn't realize the trauma that a child could be locked in the room for 7 weeks and never see another human besides being fed. So that's a perfect example of just a simple little course we did online. Is fantastic. Unfortunately, we can't adopt because I was diagnosed with trauma. So we're still working on it. But yeah, so some of the courses, there's great courses online that you can do, or trauma counseling courses, stuff like that. Any other questions? Go ahead.
I was just gonna add, the American Bible Society has a program for the church to become more trauma informed. It's
Oh,
a very
perfect.
simple but a really huge arc
Yep.
of the course. And they now, the Canadian Bible Society has adopted that program, and they're just starting to bring it into Ontario. There are churches here that are doing it. So it's very helpful if you just wanna take the next step to either recognize your own trauma
Mhm.
or help other people.
What she said. There you go. Any other questions? All right.
It's time, Mikey.
Perfect. Feel free to, I think on my handout there is my name and phone number. Honestly, if anybody has any questions you don't want to ask now, or in 6 months from now you have a family member or something and you want a police officer's advice of what to do, or someone who's gone through it what to do, give me a call, shoot me a text, tell me who you are. I'd be more than happy to help you guys. All right?